I've been building and teaching agent skills all year, specifically around DevOps, platform engineering, Kubernetes, Docker, GitHub Actions, all that stuff. And I think I've got my favorite, most advanced skill that I've ever done. And I've just spent the last few days, can you see the bags in my eyes? The last few days obsessed with getting this thing ready to give you this video. So we're gonna go through how I created this skill, why I think it's so useful if you're in any way involved with GitHub Actions. It is meant to be the Swiss Army knife for anyone writing, editing, testing, evaluating GitHub Actions, securing them, speeding them up. I've got so many scenarios. I can't wait to walk through this. Let's jump in. Okay, so I have a skills repo at GitHub, Bret Fisher /skills. The one that I have focused the most on for months has been GitHub Actions because there's just so much around GitHub Actions. And if you've been paying attention to my content, I have had workshops. I did a workshop in July on GitHub Actions security. I don't know, there's probably been a dozen videos related to GitHub Actions that I've done on this channel, mostly live streams. And I've been using these skills primarily to help my own repos and my own work and examples and demos for my courses, my consulting clients, and now with my membership program, the Agentic DevOps Guild, which now has over 50 teams involved with learning agentic DevOps and how to use agents for everything ops related. I wanted to give them a skill that they could not only learn how to make really good, complicated, advanced, and reliable skills for work, the real stuff, not the demo stuff, but also a skill that they could use every day that would benefit them, and it would use my expertise. And that's one of the types of agent skills. It's actually my favorite to create because I like creating skills that I'm good at, or I think I'm better than the agent at, or I have more opinions than the agent on how to use something. So I write a skill for that. And I use a lot of other people's skills, especially Matt Pocock's skills, which have become quite popular. In fact, I think it's one of the most popular GitHub repos right now in terms of stars. But he's put a lot of effort into his skills, and I've certainly learned a lot from him and the rigor he's put into how to create a quality skill and how to evaluate and test that it is good and it is doing what you intend to do. So we're gonna walk through a very short version of the dozens of hours I've put into this skill over the last few months, particularly in the last week, on making sure that this skill does everything I hope it would do and that it actually does it the way I would hope that it's supposed to happen, rather than just vibe coding some stuff, letting the agent fill in a bunch of words and hoping that it would just make a better GitHub action. Because the reality is modern agents and the best models out there, they make pretty good actions, but they leave a whole bunch of stuff out with just the default expectations. If you just ask it to make a CI workflow for you and do something basic, it will leave out default security stuff that I think is essential for every GitHub action. So first, let's just get you the skill so you can at least know how to get it on your machine. If you're not super advanced with skills, totally fine. We're gonna hop through some of the real basics real quick. Now, before we get into this next bit, I wanna thank this video's sponsor who can also help you make your GitHub Actions run so much faster and cheaper. Did you ever wonder what a bunch of Mac Minis must look like in a data center? Just think, a lot of Mac Minis. How do you rack those? How do you do hot and cold? Like, that's just a challenge I've never had to deal with. But I got some cool photos we can take a look at real quick from our sponsor of this video, Bitrise, who makes BuildHub for GitHub Actions. BuildHub specializes in custom action runners for iOS and Android apps, which means they are faster and cheaper than the GitHub provided runners. If you have listened to me at all about GitHub Actions, which I have been teaching and consulting on for over half a decade, one of the things I have been adamant about for years, many years, is that most teams will outgrow or get fed up with the built-in default action runners provided by GitHub. Basically, at some point when you're using runners, if you're not already there today, you will realize that they're slower than you'd like them to be. They're more expensive, especially the Mac ones, which are 10x the expense of Linux minutes. They're often too old. Their Macs are still multiple generations of Apple Silicon out of date. So I've been recommending every team that I work with on GitHub Actions that takes it seriously to move the runners to a third party. You can keep using the GitHub Actions that you have. The only thing you're going to need to change is one line in each job. And then boom, your jobs will be running on Bitrise hardware in their US and EU data centers. And after talking to the team and walking through a demo of the platform, I've got some reasons you might want to consider their stuff. One, they've got more Linux sizing options than GitHub has, up to 48 cores and 192 gigs of memory. They've got Mac M4 Pros, which is what I'm running on my local desktop, very fast, up to 14 cores and 54 gigs of memory with Xcode builds over 50% faster than GitHub's best Mac builder. The team tells me they've got a 24-hour turnaround on updates and patches for Xcode, including betas, which is important right now because we're about to enter iOS update season and everybody's got to get their apps up to date. And they have a publicly verifiable 99.9% SLA. So you can go check that out and compare it to GitHub's current situation. And they run this on their own hardware. So I asked them to send me, what do these Macs all look like? What did you build out if this is really your hardware? And as you can see behind me, I'm a fan of the blues and the pinks and the purples. So I'm a fan of this color choice they decided to go with. And they call this the Mini Orchard. Each one of these packs 32 M4 Pro Mac Minis. And of course, if you're going to do something like this, you got to have good cable management and you've got to understand your hot and cold paths. So go to bret.show/buildhub to use my promo code to get a 14-day free trial, then 25% off the self-service BuildHub plan. Also, the Pro Tier plan comes with a 1-hour onboarding call with their team. I've also put the link in the show notes. Thanks to Bitrise for sponsoring. You can just use the npx skills command. This would allow you to run an npm package without actually installing it on your local machine. It technically downloads it to your machine and puts it in a cache, so it is installed. But it allows you to run this without having to worry about the version because it'll always update the version and all that. And that's from skills.sh, from Vercel. And so they're probably one of the most popular ways to install skills. It's certainly what all my friends use, skills.sh. You can just search for skills there. There's over 1 million. It's crazy. I don't recommend 99% of them to anyone, and I've only used maybe a couple of dozen. But along with the website that allows you to search and find out details about certain skills, you can use their skills command line. So in this case, I'm going to walk you through just the quick npx skills command and my repo. And if I just paste in this command, it will actually step me through a little wizard that allows me to pick which ones from my repo you want. And in this case, we're just focused on the GitHub Actions one. So we're only going to install 2. You can certainly install all 4 if you'd like, but the one that we're really focused on here is GitHub Actions Workflow Pro. That's where all of my effort lately has been in. You can toggle it with the space, and then you're going to also install the gha-audit. Thanks, Matt Pocock, for giving me this advice. Not me, but just us on YouTube. And this is basically a skill that calls the other skill. We'll talk about what that means in a little bit. But we're going to install these 2, and I hit enter to move on. And then I'm going to choose which agent harnesses I want to put it in. Now, almost all agent harnesses allow us to put skills globally in our home directory in the .agents/skills directory. And that's where this will put it. I would rather put it there since it's a universal skill that I'm going to probably use every day for writing GitHub Actions. So I'm going to put it there. But Claude Code is one of those, maybe the only one, that still doesn't use the agents skills directory. It uses the .claude/skills directory. So we need to symlink. And luckily, this command does a lot of great things. One of them is that it will symlink so that we all have a single source of truth and all the agents are using the same version. So I'm going to leave this at the default of putting it inside of the agent skills directory as well as the Claude Code directory. Those are really the only 2 I need. And then it's going to default to the project, which I don't want. I want it global in my home directory because it's a universal skill. And then default to the symlink, which I think we all recommend pretty much. I haven't found a single reason to not symlink. And then it's going to tell me if it's safe. And so far, mine's considered safe. There's actually a bunch of scanners on skills.sh because you should read all skills before you install them. I read all skills before I install them. Actually, that used to be true. I don't read all of Matt's skills, and I haven't read all the Anthropic skills from Anthropic or Codex or Copilot. Any of the official harness skills, I don't actually read them through all the way. And so I do rely on these scanners. If you go to skills.sh, they actually have 2 or 3 different scanners that will determine whether or not it's risky of having certain commands in it that it shouldn't have, or having it go pull information from the internet, which it shouldn't really do. That's risky in certain situations, or maybe prompt injection. They look for all those types of things, and we want to stay safe. So Yes, go ahead, put those in there, and boom, I'm done. Now, some harnesses will automatically update the skills and refresh them. Other ones you have to stop and start. It just depends on the harness. So the standard for agent skills allows you to put the different skills in different directories, and Claude has a plugin marketplace, which allows you to do even more fancy things that we're not going to talk about. So the simplest way to do it is I just put them in the skills directory, and one directory per skill. And I have my GitHub Actions skill here, which you can see I literally just committed. In fact, while we've been talking, agent's been committing more fixes and little tweaks to the documentation. But the skill always belongs in the skill.md file, and then it can spread out from there to have evals, which are super cool, references, which is just more markdown. It allows me to split up stuff outside of the skill file, which allows for progressive disclosure so that my skill, in case it gets really large, like we're thinking hundreds of lines. I think if it's below 100 lines, you're fine. It's not a large skill. Put it all in the skill file. But if you start to get to 500 lines, 300 lines, you'll probably want to break that out and then put those different parts in different markdown files in references, and then reference them from your skill markdown file so that when the skill is pulled in, the agent will decide if it needs the other reference files or not, and it saves you tokens. The other thing too in the skill, if we go and look at the code itself, you can see that the description, if you didn't know about skills, they are progressively disclosed as well, just the skill itself. So that means the name and the description are the only things by default that are in your token count. And these are always going to be there. Basically, if you make this global or you put it in a project, when you're in your harness, these will automatically get loaded. So we're using a few tokens here. And this description, the goal here, best practices, is that you're describing what it does at a basic level, using a lot of keywords to maybe trigger it, because this is all about making sure the agent triggers the skill automatically when you don't manually trigger it. The description isn't needed if you manually trigger with a slash command and just type / GitHub Actions Workflow Pro, which you can do now that this is in your harness. We can jump back over. And if I'm in that directory and I'm in Claude and I just type GitHub Actions Workflow Pro, you'll see it'll pop up there. I can manually run it there. I didn't need a description for that. And this is a human invocation. This is me calling it, not the model. But if you want the model to call it when it sees that you're maybe asking something about CI or maybe something related to testing or linting or whatever the thing is that CI might do for you, all those keywords are thrown in here so that it will trigger this for GitHub Actions. And one of the recent tips I heard from, I believe it's from Matt as well as Anthropic, is we want them to be pushy. That's what I think they're calling it at Anthropic, is we want it to be pushy in the description. And so we want to tell the model, 1, what does this skill do? And 2, in what situations should the agent activate it? I'm just reading from this documentation, Cliff Notes that I have here. But at the end there, even if they don't say GitHub Actions, is a trick for current models to cause them to trigger it more often when they might forget to call it. Because before, it might have just thought, if they didn't say GitHub Actions, how do I know this is the CI thing they want? All right, so this main skill file is not even 100 lines. It's actually pretty short from a skill perspective, but it does a whole lot here, and it has different parts that will then trigger those resources, which are other markdown files based on links. So we're putting in markdown links, and the agents are smart enough now to know that if this particular thing they need to do in the checklist, then they're going to go and follow that file to go read more about security, because that particular rule is security related. And everything you're really putting in skills is best to think of it like a rule. It's like a checkoff list. That's how you get the agent to be very reliable in making sure it does all this stuff, not just cherry picking what it feels like. It's to make it think that this is a literal checkoff list. It has to do each time to complete. And so I'm not going to read all this to you. As you read through this, you're going to find that a lot of this stuff is really just best practices for CI. But since I've been using GitHub Actions so much and teaching it and consulting on it for over half a decade, I've got opinions. So I'm embedding all those opinions in here. And then we're going to use evals to test this to make sure it does everything we expect through evals and assertions. We'll get into that in a few minutes, but a few more tips while we're sitting in here. that I have sussed out of the Anthropic documentation, as well as some research on other experts, including Matt, because I'm going to keep referencing him through this because he's leading the charge for being obsessed with proper small skills, as small and as reliable as we can get them. They talk about avoiding the nevers. So even just a few months ago, I was putting in rules that would say never this, always that. And evidently, with the current models that we all have in mid to late 2026, that if you want to try to avoid the nevers, and it's more reliable in terms of making sure the agent triggers them, to use positive language, which my wife likes to tell me, always think in the affirmative, not in the negative. Well, it turns out the agents are like us, and they like the positives as well, because when you think about the negative, all you're thinking about is the negative. And so we want to say things like, always do this. And the way that I started a skill when I first started using them was when I created my first few skills, I was just listing all of my things that I have strong opinions about in a list. I like this. I want you to do this. Always do this. Never do that. I was just sort of willy-nilly, and I was listing a lot of stuff, and I had no idea if the agent was going to follow that direction, or if I even needed this skill, because maybe the agent would just have done all that automatically, especially if it's a Fable or an Opus something. It's going to probably do a lot of that stuff out of the box because it's got all the best practices from the internet. So how do I know? I'm going to call this eval-driven development, like we have test-driven development. But in the case of skills, it turns out that a lot of the opinions right now are that the way you approach this properly is to write a failed eval, and then you create the skill, whatever it needs, 1 or 2 or 10 bullet points to make that eval pass. And then the eval is going to compare not using the skill and seeing if the output is what we expect versus using the skill. And so it's grading. It's grading the no skill versus skill and understanding whether or not that did what we hoped it would do and whether or not it's even needed in the models we're testing. So I think of this as levels of maturity, because kind of like our software, when you start, everything's sort of MVP if you're on greenfield. And if you think of a skill when you first start writing it, it's a greenfield. It's not going to be super rigorous on its first iteration. So when I first start writing it, I'm really sort of ad-libbing and just jotting down all the preferences and things that I think. And I'm probably going to use at this point the best model I can find or I can afford to help me with this. So I'm going to help me write these things, and then I'm going to review its work, and then I'm going to maybe iterate on that. And I'm going to keep it pretty focused, but I'm just writing rules in a skill.md file. But once I get to 5 or 10 of these rules, I'm going to then back up and try to write my first eval, or more accurately, I'm going to have the agent come up with the first eval, and I'm going to use Anthropic's skill creator skill to do that. That's going to help me without having to do all this manually with an agent. It's going to help me walk through the process. So if we go back over to skills.sh and Anthropic's official skill, which in the past has come with Claude Code, so it's built in, but I just have it installed locally as for all of my agent harnesses because it's such an essential skill for me. And it's one of the most popular. So skill creator here, which you can see the install if you want to install it yourself. You basically call this as a workflow. You're going to call this, and it's going to step you through helping you create your skill. Now, there are pros and cons to this method because it will create a lot of text sometimes. It'll create a bunch of stuff, a bunch of words that we maybe don't need in our skill. But it has a process to iterate through fixing that. And one of the ways it can fix that is through generating evals. It has scripts, Python scripts, and it even can create dashboards and web UIs to help you evaluate, as well as run its own sub-agent evaluations and making sure that this skill is doing what it said it would do. And so that's kind of level 2. Like when you first dip your toe into using the skill creator skill, and it will create an eval, and if it doesn't, just ask it. Just ask the thread you're in, the session, to make an eval for the rules you have and to make sure that it's fully covered the rules you have in the skill file for testing. And it's going to iterate with you on running these in the background, testing them with and without the skill file to see if the model does it correctly. And if we just want to look real quick at one of the runs that I've done over these last few days, I have run through my Claude Max multiple times in the last 2 days, just building all this out because I was just so determined to get my goals done, because for months I'd been wanting this skill to be better than it was. So it just shows you here, it's even not just running the evals on the skill versus not using the skill and whether or not those two comparisons produced good GitHub Action workflows, but it's actually comparing old versions of the skill through Git commits in the history to the current ones that we just made. So you can even see that what it's showing here is the grader went through 88 checks, and in the past, on the old version, it was only passing 66 out of the 88, which essentially means that even with using the old skill, when the output of the model would produce the GitHub Action workflow, and then it would grade that output against what the skill was asking for, it really only got 75%. It got a C on that the skill actually gave us the result we were hoping for, and that now it's getting, in this run, it got 87 out of the 88, 99 percentile. It's an A, baby. I never got those in school. And it's an A there, and it tells you how long it ran and some other interesting details. But it'll break all this down, and of course, it'll depend on your model and the complexity of the skill you're building and all the evals. But you can see that it's going through multiple iterations, and you can see where it puts it in a .evals directory. So it stores stuff during the eval process. It stores that output on your local machine or wherever you're running the eval process from. It's not really meant to keep that stuff in the repo necessarily. So this is more like testing output, right? So it's going to keep that stuff on your machine, allow me to go look at particular benchmarks later if I want, or I can at least ask it questions and it knows where to go look because this is the standard of this particular skill, the skill creator skill. Now I should call out the other thing that's really helped me in this process from Matt Pocock was his skill on writing for agents. And specifically, if you look on his repo, and the links will be in the description, if you look in his skills repo, under productivity, writing for agents, you'll find that skill MD, and then he has skill mechanics file, which is really small. But these things in here helped give me tips for how to write and basically check that I'm doing the right things in my skill MD file. And so his skills help with that. This is not a workflow skill. This is a complementary skill to the skill creator skill. So you could add this into your session after you've kicked off the Anthropic skill creator skill. So on my maturity process, my goal of getting to level 5, level 3 here is right where we were at right now, where I'm getting good evals. I've got a lot of rules in there, and I'm just tweaking and optimizing the language. I'm looking at what it actually made in the skill MD and in those references. This can be a little bit dull because I'm being particular, I'm being picky because I want to make sure that my intentions of how I want these GitHub Action workflows to be created, because if you're just vibe coding all this and you're never looking at the actual skill output, you could be writing evals for things that you don't want. So technically the agent would be saying, yeah, the evals worked, but it's actually creating bad behavior because it got something wrong along the way as it was producing skill markdown output. So I do go through and I'd call that language optimization, where I'm maybe shortening some things. And the more specific you can be, the more detailed you can be in the skill, pro tip, the better the outcome is. You don't want to write anything vague. Don't say write clean best practice workflows. That's never going to work. You have to be very specific. You have to say things like, I want every workflow to always have the permissions block at the root of the workflow so that we define permissions at the root level as well as the jobs that come from it. That's the kind of detail. And then you might even say why. Because in my GitHub Action workflows, I don't want to trust the permissions from the settings of the repo, which I don't get to see inside my workflow. In case you didn't know, you got settings inside your repos that could affect the read and write of what the GitHub token has inside your workflows. And so your workflow can't assume that. So it needs to be explicit. So I would tell it that as the reason. And those reasons are really important. And that's going to make your skills much better if you give it the reasoning behind your why. Or you're just going to give it a why. Give it a why. All right, now we're up to level 4, the cost eval against cheaper models. Okay, so this is actually where it gets really fun for me, because one of the challenges in DevOps and platform engineering is that a lot of developer stuff is really the human operated token usage. But on our side, so much of our work is actually building automations that are going to run automatically without us. We're not going to be doing CI runs manually. Those are going to just happen on commits and happen on PRs. So we often will need eventually, if you're not already, having to manage token budgets, which means you have to pick cheaper models. We can't fable everything all the time. So one of the advantages of these evaluations that's super key in any, I think, pro level skill work is that you're going to need to run these evals. And when you run them, you get to pick the model. You can just tell it, run the evals on Sonnet, run it on Minimax, run it on the latest Kimi model. And you can do that and see if the skill still obeys your intentions versus a really expensive model that would be more reliable. And so to me, one of my goals as a platform engineer is to get that model as cheap as possible. And my goal is to get the skill to be 100% or as close to 100% in the evals on that super cheap model, because it's not impressive to get evals working on Opus 5. It's way more impressive to use Haiku and get the same result. And that's what is going to tell you whether the skill is really good or not. Because to me, it's not only good whether or not the skill can work, but can it work on every major model out there? At least, can it work on last year's model? And that's what you're going to be doing here. So you're going to be running these evals over and over again. I tend to run them locally. You technically could do all this as a CI or run it remote, but I tend to kick these off locally on a clone on my machine. I'll tell it simply, please use a sub-agent for breaking out all the evals. I'll pick a nicer model like Opus or even maybe a Sonnet and say, please run the evals again across a bunch of sub-agents to make it fast, and do it on the latest Haiku model or whatever your harness has access to. And it will then choose the model for that sub-agent, run the Python scripts and the additional documentation in the skill for how to run the eval. And in fact, I'm just going to jump in here and show you some of the things I can do because I've been running these evals so many times. Can you create me a web dashboard summarizing all of the eval runs we have stored locally? Yeah, it'll figure it out. I didn't know what I was asking for there. So it's going to create me a little dashboard. It's going to give me some cool details about the evals. And then last, like level 5, after I maybe do this on some super cheap models and I get it to where I figure out, maybe I can do this on Sonnet. Maybe I can do this on literally the cheapest model in my arsenal. And to me, level 5 is to take this skill and you can just have it done and say, okay, I'll use it in my work later, maybe next week or whenever. And you can go and put it in your team's repo and say, yeah, the evals are great. Everybody should check it out and try it. Or you can just tell your harness while it's sitting in that repo, hey, we have evaled this thing to death. It is at 99, 100% on always working as intended. It's producing great output. Now what I want you to do is download these 5 repos from work, clone them down, and we're going to run this skill against the GitHub Actions in all those repos, because this is a skill that doesn't only write GitHub workflows, because that was my initial goal, was just help me write new ones. And that way I don't have to yell at you when you wrote it wrong and it was dumb and I know better. And like, I just wanted it to write. But now I've built in the auditing level to it so that it knows there's a different aspect to existing workflows that I don't have any reason to change them, but I want it to go tell me what every possible little thing might be wrong with those workflows. And so I'm going to have it run in bulk on its own with a bunch of sub-agents locally, 1 or more per repo of maybe 3 to 5 other repos it's going to download that I know have GitHub Action workflows. In fact, what I asked mine to do was I just said, hey, go look at my GitHub and look through repos that I have, find some that have 3, 4, or more GitHub Action workflows in them, and then clone them down and run this skill against them in audit mode. And then if we find any problems out of that, recommend back to me what I should improve in this skill based on the real world use of the skill. And one of the interesting things about at least the models that I've been using lately, the Opus and the Fable and the Sol, which are the 3 that I dance between depending on my token usage, is what I've noticed is the agent is so aware of this paradigm that it will look at the conversation happening that we normally don't see, right? All the thinking modes and stuff that are hidden, that's the agent arguing with itself. And it will know that the agents and the sub-agents, they're in there arguing with themselves and debating about how this skill is being used and whether or not they should run this command to get the skill to do the thing in the workflow. And then, oh yeah, you need to run this linter. Let me go find it. And so it's monitoring all that interaction as a sub-agent because it can see that conversation. So it's going to sit there and monitor them. And it comes back with great insights that I find so much as basically as much as valuable as the evals themselves, because it can see the other models hallucinating, guessing wrong, realizing they have to guess when they shouldn't have to guess because, oh, that should have been in the skill. Why is that model having to guess about it or argue about it or debate? It should just know because I should have added that to the skill. So it's actually going to make the skill smarter by pulling out lessons learned, not just did it do well or do right, but the models that in those sub-agents were getting confused in trying to apply the skill and it didn't know how to handle it. And so it finds the edge cases. And that's one of my favorite portions of making a skill really good. And I think the fact that I did this so much at this level, after doing all the eval stuff, I immediately moved into, okay, now you're done with eval improvements. We're getting 100%. Go download a bunch of my repos, go find some GitHub Action workflows. And it gave me a nice little table and said, okay, I found all these. This one's got 10, this one's got 4. I'm going to download those. It puts them in a temp directory and it runs the sub-agents, one or more each in those different repos. It doesn't change anything in the repo because it's really just doing an audit in that mode. But it comes back with dozens of fixes for my skill. And sometimes they're just like half sentence changes in the rules because there's an edge case that my rule didn't catch. And so in the application of that skill, that particular sub-agent got confused and then chose incorrectly. And in fact, my model at the time was so smart because it had this huge context window. I was filling up my context window. I was like at 50%, so 500,000 tokens, which was a little gross. But I wanted it in there so that it could have all that context of knowing the history of what it was trying to do. And it decided that in some of those cases, the model shouldn't have gotten confused because the skill should have been explicit. And it knew based on my preferences that it expected it basically came back with a bunch of recommendations. And those recommendations were things that I would have never thought of as edge cases for certain scenarios. A fun example. One case is I was telling it to go and check on the SHA pinning. And if you don't know about SHA pinning, I got a video for that here on my channel. But in SHA pinning, I told it as a rule, always make sure they're pinned. And there was a workflow that didn't have any pins. And so in that particular sub-agent run, that sub-agent was deciding that I don't really know how to pin, even though I had another rule that told it how to pin. It was like, I don't really know how to go do a pin, or I don't know what command to use. So I'm just going to use the GitHub API to go pull the commit from the repo that I think I need for that particular thing. And it got it wrong and it didn't work. So then it started to troubleshoot and go down a rabbit hole of why the commit pinning on that particular action wasn't working. And the prime model, my main model, was watching that argument happen, which I would never see because it's hidden in the thoughts. I would not see that. And it detected that and it came back at me later and said, we need to fix this particular rule because these sub-agents are confused about how exactly they should be testing the SHA pinning to make sure that it's current, it's accurate, and that the pin matches the version expected. And we need rules for that are very explicit. And in fact, it caused me to pick another tool to specify this is the tool you're going to use. And it's going to be deterministic. You're not going to go guess. You're not going to go use an API call. And you're just going to use this one command line tool that you can also install to run this thing. So it's super intelligent, and I would have taken me weeks, and it would have required me to have other people tell me my skill sucked or that it didn't work for them or that it did the wrong thing. So it saved me a lot of time and frustration later by doing that. And that's maybe one of my last little pro tips here is that when you're building these skills, deterministic code, anytime you can use it, is always going to be better than prompts. So in the case of this GitHub Action skill, I have a series of linters, scanners, and tools that are necessary for creating a solid GitHub action. But anytime you can codify things or write little scripts, which there's also some scripts in this skill to save on tokens as well as increase reliability, always do that. And in fact, you should probably just ask your agent at some point, is there anything in here that we could codify in scripts, Bash, Python, whatever, to help reliably produce better output and reduce token usage? Because one of the things the skill creator skill will do is tell you how many tokens each eval ran, and are the tokens getting less over time as we improve our skill? Because that's another goal, reduce the token usage as we get better, and it will track that. So you'll see here, by the way, I just asked it to do that dashboard thing a little bit earlier, and it created this dashboard. So it's showing on the latest skill run in the evals, it got 99% using the skill of all of my rules, the dozens of rules that I have in there and expectations I have around how a GitHub action should run. You can see the different areas because I have evals, and then in each eval, there's a bunch of checks per eval that it does. And so that's how it comes up to 88 total checks, also called assertions. And you can dig into this. It just goes really deep, and it's great. Dashboards are awesome. You should always use dashboards with your agents. Now, the last little thing I want to show you, if you're still sticking around, is that Matt and Anthropic both have a little tip here for specifically this audit process. So the GitHub Action default skill here, the GitHub Actions Workflow Pro. I specifically made the name of this a little bit longer because if I just said GitHub Actions, it isn't going to help with identifying, because there's probably a lot of other GitHub Action skills out there. So I wanted to be specific around, this is focused on the workflow. It's specifically around writing, editing, and auditing workflows, and it's for pros. It turns out that the more detail you make the name, the actual better it helps the agent call it. And in this case, that's the one that the agent is allowed to call automatically. The other skill, which is called gha-audit, is something that only humans can call. It can't be called by the model. And two reasons for that. One is that technically it's not doing anything new. We're going to see in the file in a second. It's just calling back into the original skill with a specific purpose to take that skill and do something. And notice how it says at the end here, user. That implies that it's only callable by the user, which means it doesn't sit in the context window. A manual run skill or a manual evoked skill is not going to sit in your token window. So if you just look at skills, if you're in Claude Code, if you just look at your skills list, you can see here where it says user only. Those imply that they're not in context because the agent will never try to call them. So they cost you 0 tokens in your token window. And that's pretty cool. So in this case, rather than me splitting out the sort of create a GitHub action or edit a GitHub action skill from audit all of my actions and in this repo or in my entire organization or whatever, the audit one isn't necessarily separate because there's a lot of the same shared data, right? A lot of the same rules, a lot of the same information is going to be duplicated. So I didn't want to do that because then that would also waste your tokens. So what Matt and Anthropic came up with, either independently, I don't know who came up with it first, but I just noticed that both of them mentioned this, is that if we go back to my skills list here, the second one, gha-audit, it's only got a single skill file that's not very big. And inside the code, what you'll see is disable model invocation. And that's an agent skill file standard that when you say true, it's default to false, which means the model can invocate it. If it's true, then only you can call it. And in this case, it's almost like a stored command at this point. And all it's saying is, go call this other skill, which hopefully you would have installed. Otherwise, this one's not going to work. It's going to say, I don't know what that skill is. I can't find it. So it's going to call that skill and automatically try to load the reference files in addition to the skill MD so that they're all in the context window, because I have a specific audit MD, which we can go back to the skills, go back to the Workflow Pro, back into references and see the audit. And the audit isn't automatically loaded because it's a reference. It's only going to be loaded either when specifically asked by me or that other skill, or when it thinks that I'm asking about auditing. So because this is built into the Workflow Pro, you can technically audit without the manual other skill invocation. It's just like a shortcut, that other one. But you can always just say, I would like you to audit GitHub Action workflows in this repo, and it'll pick it up. It'll figure it out through the standard skill path here. Because if we just search for audit in the main skill MD file, you'll see here, auditing existing workflow. When the user hands your workflow to review, harden, secure, speed up, or ask what is wrong with their CI, read the audit MD and follow it. It covers every workflow in the repo, pulls recent run history with a Python script, which is deterministic, less tokens. It's a good thing. It actually, I didn't think that up. The agent said, hey, I should do this. I should make this for you. Failures and workflows and job ranks. It does a whole bunch of stuff to cover the gambit of what might be wrong. And if you, of course, give it more of a prompt and tell it exactly what you're looking for, it will focus on that. But if you just say audit, it's got a bunch of stuff in there. In fact, it might actually at this point be a little too much. I do tend to like it, but I think eventually maybe splitting this stuff out into certain types of audits, like failures of runs, any log failures in your job runs, that's a certain type of audit, or security audit. I can see myself breaking this stuff up a little bit more. But you can see here that it is got, let's see how many lines of code we got in here, 138 lines. So it's much bigger than the actual skill MD itself, but it's only going to be pulled in your context window and loaded when it thinks it needs it. And you'll notice down here at the bottom, one of the things it says, you're only done when, and some of that stuff can be important to be very clear, especially when you have a longer skill and you have a cheaper model. A lot of the older or cheaper models tend to quit early. They seem to be a lot lazier. So if I use an old version of GPTs, they tend to quit before they get halfway done sometimes. And I don't understand. It's just not as tenacious as a Fable or an Opus is. And so sometimes you have to give it literal, do everything in this checklist and remind it of that. And then down at the bottom, you have to say, you're not done until you do all these. So you have to reinforce it a little bit. And of course, your evals will help. That's one of the keys of evals, is to run it against those cheaper models so you can see if it quits too early and fails a bunch of the tests. So I hope this has really helped. I know this isn't a complete course, but that's the course I'm building. In case you didn't know, I'm in the middle of building out 2 different courses for my Agentic DevOps Guild that we meet every week about these exact topics, implementations of all these different things around agents for specifically operator, people that are dealing with CI/CD, platform engineering, DevOps, DevSecOps. That's where this group focuses, and I hope you would check it out. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.